So this top number here, 54%, under the Queen 6-2 board, Ace 6-2 is a different board, represents how often you will win this hand with pocket eights against a 70% c-bet range of a 37% open range if the hand just checks all the way down on a random run out, right? So this is your equity against his range going forward, assuming that he's c-bet this portion of it. Now, that is how often you'd win if you just checked it down. So that's clearly far more often than you need to make a profit. If you could be guaranteed for some reason that, like, say your opponent was all in already, like his c-bet was 2/3 pot c-bet was like all of his stack, and then you could just check it down, then of course with pocket eights you'd be calling here, given these two statistics, the pre-flop and flop statistic, because you'd be winning 54% of the time, and you only need to win 29% of the time. Now, this second number is a very different number. It represents something else. What it is the minimum bluffing frequency that your opponent would have to have with either like firing a second barrel or firing a bet on the river after the turn checks through, so that you would no longer be winning often enough to make a profit if your plan is to just fold to another bet no matter what. So suppose you check call the flop and your thought is, I'm just going to check call, and if I showdown, great, and if anything else happens besides getting to showdown, then I'm just going to fold. And of course we're assuming that within the realm of reasonability, like you're going to call like a min bet on the river or something, but we're assuming that your opponent will bet fairly normal standard amounts. So your opponent has to bluff at least 48% of the time at some other point in the hand, either the turn or the river, and then, of course, you stick with your plan and fold in order to make this call unprofitable on Queen 6-2 for you, given, his range and frequency and everything. But those same numbers on Ace 6-2 for the same opening range and the same c-bet frequency and so on, assuming a sort of normal mixture of betting kind of all your real hands, and then, bluffing with some hands in addition to that for your opponent, is 33%. That's your equity against his range. And therefore, his minimum bluffing frequency is only 14%. So as long as he bluffs like 14% or more on the turn or river, then your plan of calling once and then just folding no matter what else starts to get really bad and lose a lot and lose money. So the actual numerical cost in terms of big blinds, in the example, I've only done it for the Ace 6-2 board, but in the example where your opponent actually bluffs 25% of the time on average between the cumulative rest of the hand on the turn and river, which is actually a pretty low bluffing frequency for a lot of sort of sensible players, is 0.6 big blinds per hand that this happens. So if you get in these spots on ace-high boards where people tend to bluff on the second or third barrel, some amount of the time, but they're c-betting kind of a lot in the first place, and they just like to put the pressure on every now and then. Only 25% of the time they'll even make a bluff later, and you just end up folding out on the turn or river every single time, then that'll probably come up a number of times. Some small number, but more than one time on average per 100 hands, and that will cost you about 0.6 big blinds per time, which even if it comes up, say, twice per 100 hands, that's 1.2 big blinds per 100 off your win rate right there. And that comes from someone who's kind of opening a lot of buttons and also c-betting a lot too, and then plays relatively straightforward without even bluffing very much. So that's not a description of someone who's just an insanely tough player. That's not a description of someone who's really good, but if that's how you play without thinking about just folding straight away on certain boards or actually calling more times or turning your hand into a bluff or whatever, you actually can lose a lot of money even against someone who's not very tough. Now I did one more example, and this is against someone who c-bets 50% of the time, which has become over the last, I think 3 years, a little bit more standard. People used to c-bet kind of a lot and then just decide whether or not they wanted to multi-barrel, but often be one and done. And now people are actually c-betting quite a bit less for a variety of reasons. So 50% c-bet range, again, the same pre-flop, 37% open. Against that on Queen 6-2 Rainbow with pocket eights, you have 41% equity. And that means that your opponent has to bluff a minimum of 31% of the time going forward through the rest of the hand in order to eliminate the profit that you could have made from checking down, because now he's forcing you to fold, because again, you're just check folding out. That's your plan. That's how you play the hand.